writing it's a hard thing, and it's a hard thing to execute. I think well. Like writing, it comes from this very intense personal place, and then it needs to move into this very intense public place, as you can see from just the gallery itself, how intense it really can be. So tonight we have 4 readers, all who are going to share with us some of those kind of intense moments. So our first reader tonight is Dr. Cuomo, who's a philosophy and women's study professor at UGA here. She earned her PhD in philosophy from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Formerly a professor of philosophy and women's study at the University of Cincinnati, Dr. Cuomo's research focuses on ethics, feminist philosophies, race, sexuality, environmental ethics, and art. She's the author of Feminism and Ecological Communities and Ethical Flourishing, and The Philosopher Queen, Feminist Essays on War, Love, and Knowledge, which was nominated for a Lando Literary Award and an American Philosophical Association Book Award. And she's also co-editor of the Feminist Philosophy Reader. Dr. Cuomo has been awarded grants from the Rockefeller Foundation, the National Science Foundation, and the Charles Phelps Task Center. She's currently working on a project on indigenous knowledge concerning climate change in northern Alaska. She's also published widely in the field of ethics and the environment. For the 2009 to 2010 academic year, Dr. Cuomo was away at Amherst College, where she worked on a project on feminist and other questions concerning.
Thank you so much to VOX and to Lizzie for inviting us to present work in this space and amidst this incredible art. I want to thank Cecilia for doing this work. It's just incredible. If you have time during the intermission or afterwards, if you haven't already, to go around and actually, enter the piece and look closely, because from afar it looks so playful, and then you go in and you see that these are reflections on war, and these are reflections of a war that we have just all recently lived. And so these are all days that hopefully, you should remember. That is my child screaming. Shut up! Wrecking my vibe, man. So, and of course the Iraq War continues, and of course now with the end of the occupation, we're supposed to replace our fervor for the Iraq War with a renewed fervor for the war in Afghanistan. Now, the book that I'm reading from tonight, Philosopher Queen, and I did bring a few copies in case you feel like purchasing at the intermission or afterwards. The Philosopher Queen was published before the Iraq War started, and largely in response to the war in Afghanistan and the post-9/11 political conditions in this country. Karen and I were living in New York. We moved to New York in August of 2001 to care for a relative who was dying. Lo and behold, we became part of a much, in addition to that astronomical drama, yet another big drama, and that was being involved in the anti-war movement in New York City after 9/11. And I'm mentioning this because I think it's just so very important that we remember that the biggest response to 9/11 in this country immediately where it happened, the people that were bombed in New York City responded largely with an anti-war movement. And that was the sentiment in New York City after 9/11 and for months thereafter. And of course, there was no coverage of that in the media, and so then that means in this world people didn't know about that, just like there was inadequate coverage of the global protests against the impending Iraq War on February 15th, 2003, the biggest day of anti-war protests that have ever happened on this planet or in this country, including during the Vietnam War. And this country was overwhelmingly against the start of the Iraq War, yet As we know, it was sort of a done deal from the perspective of the Bush administration. And then once the war begins, Americans tend to be good patriots and to get behind that war. Anyway, given all this, things seem sort of hopeless, so I think that one thing that I don't know, sometimes it seems like the most that one can do is just contribute to the anti-war, anti-militaristic culture, and I think that that's at least what we're about tonight. So I'm going to start with a poem, and then I'm going to read excerpts from an essay called War as an Opportunity for Learning, and then I'm going to read a piece called The Philosopher Queen on War. And it's like, yeah, she's on war, you know what I mean? She's like, on war. September poem. The whole world comes to me in the form of dust. Breath is our deepest relation with the world. Every breath is a gulp of particulate matter. Their bodies turn to dust. That night, black powder glittered in the streetlight. If it is small enough, it lands in your lungs. I asked for a visit from peaceful spirits. Dust more friendly than a mushroom cloud. Floating ash is everywhere these days. She said they bombed rubble into dust. It's amazing what the body can handle. Just a few days after the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, a top Bush aide declared that we need new constructions of war. The U.S. was officially using post-structuralist language to initiate a new form of war in response to a new sort of enemy, but it wanted an old-fashioned war as well. The hasty call to war, heard before anything was known about the perpetrators of the attacks, was spun as responsiveness to a widespread need for revenge and a sense of control in the face of terrorism. But one man's act of terrorism is another man's act of war. There was no space for asking if the 9/11 suicide attackers believed that they were at war with the U.S. or if such a war had been declared. If the suicide bombers were participating in a war, were they also terrorists? Such distinctions were relevant because in labeling the attacks on American civilians terrorism, strategic fact-finding was mostly irrelevant. The only strategy available was annihilation, because we do not negotiate with terrorists. After the bombing of New York, there were no public discussions of strategic responses to terrorism, no diplomatic offers that did not assume a state of war, no immediate plans to use America's incredible economic power to effect long-range change in the repressive and poverty-stricken nations where terrorism flourishes. Revenge was assumed to be a legitimate state response to mysterious but absolutely catastrophic violence. Big media never questioned the belief that immediate military action was necessary to reestablish American security after such destruction on our soil, or that a dramatic display of military force was the best way to prevent further harm to American civilians and property. Vengeance requires suffering and loss of life. And war requires enemy nations, people and land that can be justifiably destroyed. Terrorists were the enemy, but since terrorists are so hard to find, they don't make good military targets. Connections between the suicide hijackers and the Taliban leaders of Afghanistan provided a suitable target for revenge, and good reasons for waging a high-tech war against a clearly tyrannical regime, even though that misogynist regime and its terrorist training camps had been supported by the U.S. for years. But whether or not the war in Afghanistan satisfied desires for violence, the elimination of the Taliban or a particular fanatical religious leader could not be tantamount to the removal or reduction of threat, that other thing war is supposed to accomplish, because the threat of terrorism is absolutely diffuse.